Welcome to the Rude Dude Recovery a Big Book Fourth Step Workshop. This workshop is unfiltered, unsweetened, and unsalted, which means that nothing added that's not in the big book. Rude Dude Recovery at gmail.com. There are two questions in the first step. The first step is in past tense. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol and our lives had become unmanageable. The two questions are listed on the top of page 44. In the preceding chapter, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we made it clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If when you honestly want, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take. And so those are the two questions, and those are answered in past tense. In the last 5 years or last 10 years, the last 2 years of my drinking or using, could I guarantee how much I was going to drink when I started? And if somebody who loved me asked me to stop, can I stop and stay stopped? And the unmanageability is how many ways have I tried to do this and found I can't succeed? So if a mere code of morals or better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. We found that such codes and philosophies didn't save us. No matter how much we try, we could wish to be moral, we could wish to be philosophically competent. In fact, we could will these things with all our might. The needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. And so this is a point to where my life is unmanageable. I'm powerless over alcohol. These two questions: when I drink, can I guarantee how much I'm going to drink? And if somebody who loves me asks me to stop, can I stop and stay stopped? And this unmanageability part of this is how many methods have I tried? How many ideas have I tried on my own to stop? How many recovery centers have I gone in? How many times have I tried to limit the number of drinking? How many times have I tried to stay away from people, places, and things? How many times have I tried to solve this problem on my own and with my own thinking, and did it work? So lack of power, that was our dilemma. And a dilemma is I have multiple choices and they both suck. If one choice is good, it's not a dilemma. I'll just go that way. And so the dilemma here is that to be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on the spiritual principles of life are not easy alternatives to face. And so that's my dilemma. Like I explained earlier, is I'm familiar with going to jail. I'm familiar with losing jobs. Although I don't like this stuff, it becomes my alcoholic life seems to be the only normal one. Lack of power was our dilemma. We got to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than itself, obviously. But where and how are we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself that will solve your problem. And my problem is drinking. My problem is I can't keep sober. The problem is singular. In this respect, problem is singular, not problems. And so the ultimate question is if these two questions in the first step apply, so where am I to find this power and how am I to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Not step 2, not step 3. It's this book. It's this program. And as I'll explain to you in the next page, it is a process. So the most important thing here is that I'm powerless and I understand powerless, and where and how am I to find this power? So page 46. Much to our relief, we discovered we didn't need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect contact with Him. And so my conception of God is not God, it's what I understand. The book refers to it as the feeling of a friend. In my own personal story, it's the love of my grandmother. When I pray, or when I'm going through this process, I get the feeling and the love of my grandmother in my heart, and I'm asking her for the answers. I'm asking her to remove my fear and redirect my attention to what she would have me be. Now, my grandmother is not God, but I go through this process with this conception of God to when I get to the 12th step, then I have this spiritual experience and I can believe in a God. The first and most important thing here is not that I believe in God here in the second step, is that I'm willing to believe. So we use our own conception, however limited that was. On page 28, it says that a chapter addressed to the agnostic, many who were once in this class are now among our members. Surprisingly enough, we find such convictions no great obstacle to a spiritual experience. So what that taught me and what that explained to me was that I needed to work the steps to have this personality change so I could believe in a God. But just starting out in step 2, I used my own conception, something that made sense to me, just to get me through this process, so my mind could slow down and my mind could open up to God. And so that's the purpose of step 2. So my conception of God is the love of my grandmother. And so here it says, when therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. This applies to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself, what do they mean to you? At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to affect our first conscious relation with God as we then understood Him. So this entire chapter and this entire process at this point is all about prejudice. It is all about my preconceived ideas. It's all about my preconceived ideas of God that I learned as a kid, about how I feel about Him now, what my fear is about this. And so it's all about prejudice, and the chapter We Agnostics mentions prejudice about 7 or 8 times. And so this whole thing here, this approach is all about my preconceived ideas without all the facts, prejudiced. And the next part of this is step 2. There's no discussion. It's step 2. We need to ask ourselves but one short question: do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe there's a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him he's on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderful and effective spiritual structure can be built. And so the book uses these construction terms, and this one is upon this cornerstone, this simple cornerstone. And a cornerstone is the first reference point of a building structure. You can put it at any point, and you can build a building 3 miles long. You can build a building 20 feet long. You can go 20 feet high, or you can go 3,000 feet high. But everything begins at one corner point, or one datum point, as people sometimes refer to it. It's a reference point. It's a cornerstone or a datum point. All right, page 55. Actually, we're fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, and by worship of other things, but in some form or another it's there, for faith in a power greater than ourselves, and the miraculous demonstration of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but He was there. So lack of power is my dilemma, and the dilemma is I got 2 choices. They both suck, but where and how am I to find this power? Where this power is deep down within me. And how am I going to find it? By searching fearlessly. So deep down inside of me, this power is blocked by calamity, which is chaos, which in my case is resentment. It's blocked by pomp, which is ego, which is my fear. It's blocked by worship of other things, which is anything I put in front of this thing I'm going to lose. Relationships, right? So my preconceived ideas about these things are what's killing me. Deep down inside every man, woman, and child is this fundamental idea of God, but it's blocked, it's obscured, it's hazed by chaos, by resentments, by fear, and by relationships. But in some form or another it's there, for faith in a power greater than ourselves, and the miraculous demonstration of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw, which means this is after the inventory. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. So they're telling you what the conception of God is, or do I I have the ability to have a friend, so I have the ability to have this God. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he's there. And the only other part in the book where it talks about search fearlessly is in the fourth step. And the fourth step, what I'm doing is I'm trying to discover the things in myself that are blocking me. What resentments it's meant, what fears blocking me from this God, what worship of other things is blocking me from this God. The purpose of the inventory is to discover what's blocking me from this power. Next paragraph. This is where the 100 people kind of close out this portion of the book. They say we can only clear the ground a bit. If our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, but there's that word again, basing opinions without all the facts, it helps sweep away prejudice, enables you to think honestly, encourages you to search diligently, there's that word search again, diligently within yourself, then if you wish you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come. So this is what I consider to be the 100% guarantee in Alcoholics Anonymous. Page 60. Many of us exclaim, what an order, I can't go through with it, do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We're not saints. The point is we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we've set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, which are those two questions on page 44, the chapter to the agnostic, which is, are you willing to look at your prejudice? Are you willing to suspend your disbeliefs? And our personal adventures before and after make clear. So your personal adventures, drunk or sober, do they make clear through pertinent ideas that are you alcoholic and can you manage your own life? That probably no human power could relieve your alcoholism, and that God could and would if he were sought. Sought being the most important word or phrase in this. It's not finding God. The power here is in the seeking. It's not in the finding. So being convinced of these ABCs in our description in the chapter to the agnostic, being convinced that God could and would if he were sought, we're now at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over the care of God as we understood him. Just what do we mean by that, and just what do we do? So the third step is a 2-step process. To turn my will over means I plan the fishing trip but not the fish dinner. Turn my life over means, can I live in a world without fear? Can I stop being dominated by fear? Fear and faith cannot cohabitate. So the third step is something that I take one time and practice it for the rest of my life. The third step is not turning my will and my life over. The third step is making a decision to do it. 3 frogs sitting on a log, one decides to jump off. How many frogs are left? 3. It's just a decision. So the third step is something that I take one time and I practice it for the rest of my life. So being convinced, we're at step 3, which is we decided to turn our will, which is my manipulations, and I plan the fishing trip but not the fish dinner, and our lives, which means I live in a world without fear, over to God as we understand him. Just what do we mean by that, and just what do we do? So at this point in this process, these 100 people are going to show us precisely how to turn our will and our life over. They're going to show us precisely how to recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. They're going to give us clear-cut directions on how to do that. From this point on, what we're going to do is when these 100 people said they did something, we're going to follow it as close as we can. Just what do we mean by that, and just what do we do? So these 100 people are going to show us how to turn our will and our lives over. Okay, many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we couldn't live up to them even though we would like to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own part. We had to have God's help. So the third step is a decision. It's not actually doing it. It's a decision to do steps 4 through 9. So this is the how and the why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next, we decided, and this is the third step decision right here, that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. He is the principal, we are his agents. He is the Father, and we are his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arcs to walk path to freedom. So again, the authors are using construction terms to explain things. The keystone is the stone that holds the arcs together. So let's go back over this. This is the how and the why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. So there would be times where I'd be in a foxhole prayer, say, God, help me. So I'm telling God what to do. If I pray for God to make somebody well, then I'm telling God what to do instead of just asking for God's will. Next, we decided that hereafter in the drama of life, which is, they tell you pretty clear that life is going to be drama. As long as two people are around, there's going to be some form of drama. God was going to be our director. He's the one that runs the show. He's the principal. We are his agents. And what does it mean to be an agent, like the agent of the federal government? What does it mean to be God's agent or the principal and you are his agent? It means that I'm empowered by. I'm empowered by to carry out his laws, his wishes, his rules. So I'm empowered by this principal or this director or God. He is the Father and we are his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arcs which passed to freedom. So at the top of page 63 is a thing called the third step promises. And what Bill has done is Bill has welcome to step 3. The step has 3 parts in it. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thy will. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help with thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. A couple of important things here is notice that there's no amen after that prayer. The amen comes after the 7th step prayer. So this entire process, steps 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, are all one process, or all one spiritual process. The 3 ideas contained in the 3rd step is, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and do with me as I will. I can't do it. I'm seeking, please help. Relieve me of the bondage of self. I can't see the world through anybody else's eyes but mine. Allow me to look parallel at how my actions affect other people. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help with thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. Take away my pride, take away my ego, take away my shame, take away my self-pity, that I can make my amends to you, or make my amends to people, and set things right, and let my parents off the hook, so to speak, and just travel through life. We thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready, that we could last utterly abandon ourselves to him. So this 3rd step, because there's no amen after this 3rd step prayer, what they're asking you to consider, and it says this into action, is that you are agreeing to doing the inventory to discover what's blocking you. You are agreeing to confession. You're agreeing to reading this off to somebody. You are agreeing to making your amends, to setting matters straight, and you're agreeing to sponsoring people and to take other people through this process. So what I tell people that I work with is that take as much time as you need to think about this. And I've had a couple people ask me if they can have a couple days to think about this, and I say sure. Right? As it says, we thought well before taking this step, making sure we're ready. So I ask people to take as much time as you need to think about this. But once we say this prayer, voicing it without reservation, then we launch, and you're off and running. You agreed to do this. You agreed to do this. You said yes. So take as much time as you need to think this over. When you say this prayer, you're agreeing to steps 4 through 9. Pretty simple. Therefore, we start on a personal inventory. This is step 4. A business which takes a regular inventory usually goes broke. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and fact-facing process. It's an effort to discover the truth about stock and trade. Its object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods to get rid of them promptly without regret. If the owner of the business to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. We did exactly the same thing with our life. We took stock honestly, First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. Being convinced that self manifested in various ways was what had defeated us, we consider it as common manifestation. So we start on this personal inventory. And this personal inventory is to discover the things in ourselves that are blocking us from this power. So this is step 4. And it's an effort to discover the truth about stock and trade. The stock and trade is the habitual habits I use in a given situation or a given scenario. When I approach my mother, I have this stock and trade, this game, this ploy, this con that I use to talk her into something or talk her out of something. Right? And I don't treat my mother the same way that I treat my dad. I don't treat the bum on the street the same way that I treat the guy in the office. So I have this particular trade, this game, this con that's different with everybody, but it all has one thing in common: is I'm looking to get the best arrangement for me. So that's the truth about my stock and trade. Its object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods to get rid of them promptly without regret. If the owner of the business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. So we did exactly the same thing with our life. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup that caused our failure. And so there's 2 things that a friend will not help me find. A friend will not help me find the truth about my stock and trade, or they cannot help me find the flaws in my makeup that caused my failure. Friends will care too much about my feelings and want to protect how I feel rather than tell me the truth. And when I'm at this point in my life and this point in the journey, I don't need somebody to protect how I feel or to love me till I love myself. I need somebody to care enough about me to tell me the truth. And that's how this works. The truth hurts. So being convinced that self manifested in various ways was what had defeated us, we consider it as common manifestation. So self is me and how I think, how I breathe, how I act, and it's produced, and I manifest that in various ways, which is one is selfishness. If you don't do things how I think you should, I get resentful. I'm self-centered because I want you to like me, but I can't tell you a whole lot about me because you won't like me. But I just want you to like me, and I want you to pay attention to me just because I'm here. And self-seeking is, what do I need to tell you or her to get my way? I'm self-seeking. Everything's about me. So it's ways that myself manifests itself in various ways is what had defeated us. So we consider its common manifestation, and resentment, fear, and sexual conduct is part of the common manifestation. And resentment is the number 1 offender. Resentment is rethinking. Is rethinking an injustice done to me or somebody else. So resentment, it destroys more than anything else. From it stems all form of spiritual disease. For we've not only been mentally and physically sick, we've been spiritually sick. So what a spiritual sick person looks like, and we're going to discuss this further on. But a spiritually sick person is described on page 52, where it says we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to a human problem the same readiness to change our point of view. We're having trouble in personal relationships. We can't control our emotional nature. I'm a prey to misery and depression. I can't make a living. I have a feeling of uselessness. I'm full of fear. I'm unhappy, and I can't seem to be a real help to other people. So that's the spiritual sickness that I suffer from. So in this resentment, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. And then we ask ourselves why we're angry. In most cases, we found our self-esteem, our pocketbook, our ambition, personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened, so we're burned up. And so this is the beginning of the inventory. So resentment, so we just list the people that we're resentful at, and then we write the cause down. And then affects mine. So column 1 lists all people, institutions, or principles with whom I'm angry. And personally, I don't think that you need to just write a list of these people and then go down and write the cause of these people. Yeah, I think that's kind of overthinking it too much. I think if I have a person that I'm resentful at, the next thing that comes to mind is why am I resentful at that person? And so I write that down. You know, and then if I have an institution that I'm resentful at, right, the first thing is the institution, whether it be marriage, whether it be Valentine's Day, whether it be a bank, whether it be Verizon, whether it be right, whether it be a treatment center or the cops, right, an institution, and then the cause of the resentment. And so, I mean, it seems to make more sense. And let's not overthink this thing. You know, this is not the only inventory where we're going to do. So we list people, institutions, or principles with whom we're angry. That's column 1. Column 2 is the reason for the resentments. Why are you resentful, burned up, or sore? What about them, or what did they do to make you angry? List all the reasons you have for each name in column 1. What happened? Be specific. Why are you angry? So this is, if you do this correctly, this is where you get to be a victim. This is play the victim, do it very well, right here. So column 3 affects my, and referring to the example from the book, I'm resentful of Mr. Brown, right? That's the person. His attention to my wife. So his attention to my wife. This is the cause. Did it hurt or threaten or interfere with my pocketbook? And you see the underlined words here, and you see the other qualifiers. Hurt, threaten, or interfered is a qualifier. The areas of self are pocketbook, self-esteem, security, ambitions, personal relations, sex relations, or pride. So his attention to my wife, did it hurt, threaten, or interfere with my self-esteem? And if it did, I write it down. His attention to my wife, did it hurt, threaten, interfere with my security? So if it did, I write it down. His attention to my wife, did it hurt, threaten, interfere with my ambitions? If it does, I write it down. His attention to my wife, did it hurt, threaten, or interfere with my personal or sex relations? So personal relationships, write it down. Sex relations, write it down. Did it hurt, threaten, interfere with my pride? If it does, you write it down. This is what the inventory looks like. 3 columns. I'm resentful at, the cause affects my. I'm resentful at Mr. Brown. Why? The cause, his attention to my wife. Told my wife of my mistress. Brown may get my job at the office. Affects my sex relations and self-esteem. Mrs. Jones. She's a nut. She's stubby. She committed her husband for drinking. He's my friend. She's a gossip. Affects my personal relationships, self-esteem, fear. So we go through our lives in this manner with these 3 columns, and we go all the way back as far as we can go back, and we write down the people that we rethink, somebody who did an injustice to us, a resentment, somebody that's just stuck in our crawl. And so we go back through our lives, nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. If you got 10, you got 10. If you got 20, you got 20. So before column 4, it's really not a column, it's a narrative. There's no column here. When the first 3 columns are completed, it gives us a lot to do. So second paragraph on page 66. It's plain that life which includes deep resentments leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander hours that might have been worthwhile. But with the alcoholic whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal, for when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off the sunlight of the spirit, the insanity of alcohol returns, and we drink again. And with us, to drink is to die. So, if you were to think about these resentments on your list, would you agree that you allow these resentments to happen? Would you agree that you permit these resentments to happen? And would you agree that this leads only to, that these resentments have led only to futility and unhappiness? And do these resentments have a snowballing effect? As if you have a resentment towards your mom. Does that mean that you don't go to your family reunion, so you don't bring mom around your kids? And so is there a snowball effect wrapped up around these resentments? And would you agree that you permit these resentments to happen? And how many hours have you squandered in these relationships that might have been worthwhile? But with the alcoholic whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, isn't these resentments infinitely grave? Aren't they fatal? For when you harbor these feelings, you shut yourself off the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns, and we drink again, and with us to drink is to die. So what they're asking us to consider here, and what they're kind of pointing out, is that we allow these resentments to happen. Nobody's saying in this process that you have to forgive them. Nobody's saying you have to agree with them. Nobody's saying that they're right and you're wrong. Nobody's saying that these people, if they deserve to be in jail, should not be in jail. They should be in jail. Nobody's saying that you got to forgive them or you got to pray for them or anything like that. It's just saying, they look, dummy, you're pissed off at these people. It's killing you. It's shutting you off the sunlight of the Spirit. You keep drinking and you're going to die. Who's the dumb one now? So we turn back to the list. So now we go back to these first three columns. Right? It turns back to the list where we held the key to our future. We prepare to look at it from an entirely different angle. The angle being is that these resentments are bothering me, they're destroying me, and I gotta find a way to resolve these things. Regardless if I feel justified in the resentment or not, they're killing me. There's no such thing to an alcoholic as a justified resentment. We look at it from an entirely different angle. I permit these resentments and they're killing me. So it says this is our course. We realize the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. So if you were to look at the first person on your resentment list and look at Uncle Harry or whatever it is, mom, dad, and ask yourself, is mom having trouble with personal relationships? Can she control her emotional nature? Is she a prey to misery and depression? Can she make a living? Does she have a feeling of uselessness? Is she full of fear? Is she unhappy? Can she seem to be a real help to other people? Are the people on your list spiritually sick? And so we go through them individually, one by one, and we consider whether or not they're spiritually sick. So considering whether or not the people on our list are spiritually sick, though we don't like their symptoms and the way they disturb us, they like ourselves are sick too. So we ask God, which means this is a prayer, to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When mom offends me, when dad offends me, I always say to ourselves, this is a sick man, how can I be helpful? God, save me from being angry, thy will be done. So we say this prayer after every person, or for this every person on this resentment list as we go along. So referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely look for our own mistakes. Where we've been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, or frightened, the situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person's involvement entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them, we placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly, we're willing to set these matters straight. So, back to the top paragraph, referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done to us. So at this point in this process, the cause can no longer be in play. The cause in the first three columns can no longer be in play. What they did to you can no longer be in play. This is not my part in this resentment. This is not my part in this cause. The cause was a retaliation of our actions. Most of the time, it was a retaliation. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate, seeming without provocation, but invariably we find that sometime in the past we made a decision based on self that later placed us in a position to be hurt. So putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done. So the only thing left on this inventory in the three columns is the person and affects mine. The cause is no longer in play. Though we don't like the situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person's involvement entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. Where we saw our faults, we listed them, we placed them before us in black and white, and willing to set these matters straight. For those of you who don't know, this is your 8-step list. Refer to page 76, where it says, we have a list of all persons we had harmed and to whom we're willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. So this is not only your mistakes, it is your 8-step list. Here we have page 60. As we're writing down what our mistakes in the relationship are, this is a good reference to kind of think about how we treated these people. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show. It's where we're trying to arrange the lights and the ballet and the scenery and the rest of the players in his own way. If his arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may be sometimes quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, he's more likely to have varied traits. So what this is referring to is the truth about my stock and trade. Is that I will approach mom or dad or Uncle Harry in a particular way to get what I want. If my arrangements to stay put, if only people would do as I wished. So in trying to make these arrangements, I may be quite considerate, patient, generous, even modest, self-sacrificing, just to get my way. What usually happens, the show doesn't come off very well. He begins to think life doesn't treat him right. He decides to exert himself more on the next occasion. He becomes more demanding or gracious as the case may be, as my stock in trade requires. Still the play does not suit him. Admitting he may be somewhat at fault, he is sure that other people are more to blame. He becomes angry, indignant, self-pitying. So I become resentful. What is his basic trouble? Is he not really a self-seeker when trying to be kind? Is he not a victim of delusion he can risk satisfaction and happiness out of this world if only he manages well? Is it not evident to the rest of the players that these are the things he wants? And do not his actions make each one of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can out of the show? Is he not, even in his best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony? And so this is what I'm considering as I'm writing down what my mistakes are in this relationship. Chances are people who are on this resentment list are not somebody that I just met on a bus. There's somebody that I have had relationships with over a period of years, and they didn't behave how I think they should. They treated me wrong. And so if I read this and I ask myself, is this how I treated them? Then that's my mistakes in the relationship. It's important to see our mistakes, our blame, or our faults. Right? So if we go through this thing and we try to resolve this, resolve means marked by firm determination. I'm going to figure this out. And mistakes, resolutely look for my own mistakes. An error in action, calculation, opinion, or judgment caused by poor reasoning, carelessness, insufficient knowledge. So doesn't that sound like an alcoholic? An error in action, an error in calculation, an error in opinion, an error in judgment caused by poor reasoning. Isn't that a very trait of an alcoholic? Poor reasoning, carelessness, insufficient knowledge. That's called prejudice, insufficient knowledge. Kind of funny, huh? So using the example in the book, right, on the first column, Mr. Brown, the cause is his attention to my wife, and I know we're getting rid of the cause. I'm just showing this as an example. What mistake did I make in the relationship? And again, I'm just guessing at this, using this as an example. I made this up, right? So Bill's resentment at Mr. Brown. What Bill did when I had been hungover on Monday mornings, I made my wife call in sick for me. So that's dishonest. At the company party, I broke the boss's lampshade and made my wife take the blame so I wouldn't lose my job. I did that because I'm frightened. I asked her to be nice and suck up to him. I called it working it, baby, just so I could get my way. He liked it. I sent my wife to him to save my butt. Self-seeking. Okay, this is the fear inventory. About page 67. Notice the word fears, bracket alongside difficulty, Mrs. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and his wife. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our life. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence is shot through with it. It sets in motion trains of circumstances which bring us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. But did we not ourselves set the ball rolling? We think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. So if we look at this and we ask ourselves, is this statement true? This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our life. Is that true? If I'm afraid of not getting a job, when I have the job, am I afraid I'm going to lose it? It's an evil and corroding thread. Now that's not good news there. Evil and corroding. That means over a period of time, it just starts to disintegrate. Evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence is shot through with it. It sets in motion trains of circumstances which bring us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. So it sets in motion these trains. One fear-based decision only leads to more fear. If I'm afraid of not getting a job, when I get a job, I'm afraid I'm going to lose it. If I'm afraid of not being in a relationship, when I get in a relationship, I'm afraid I'm going to lose it. If I'm afraid of people not liking me, I'm afraid of people liking me. I'm afraid of fitting in, I'm afraid of not fitting in. So any fear-based decision only leads to more fear, and it turns out that I'm afraid of everything. But did we not ourselves set the ball rolling? We think fear will be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. So the ultimate question here is, and this is part of the third step, can fear and faith cohabitate? Can you have faith and live in fear? There's a difference between believing in God, a definite difference between believing, where you can believe in God, but not have faith. And so our actions demonstrate whether we have faith or not. Fear and faith cannot cohabitate. So the third step talks about turning our will and our lives over. Turning my will over means I stop conning and manipulating. And most of the time I can do that pretty easy just by not talking. But turning my life over means I have no fear. So this is the directions. It says we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper. Even though we had no resentment and connection with them, we ask ourselves why we had them. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? Of course it's because self-reliance failed us. Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. So we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper. That's all we do. And it says we ask ourselves why we have them. It doesn't say that you write why you have them, but if you want to make a note about why you have these fears, fine. But it says we list our fears and we ask ourselves why we have them. So here's an example of the fear list. Fear of being alone, fear of fire, fear of not being liked by others, fear of being unemployed, and fear of heights. And so is it possible that everything here, the opposite also applies, with a few exceptions? But being alone, if I'm afraid of being alone, am I also afraid of being with somebody? If I'm not being liked by others, am I afraid of getting to know people? So does every fear, does the opposite also apply? I mean, obviously there's some legitimate fears like fire and heights here. They're legitimate fears. But although this heights one could be just a fear. If I fall off a ladder, I'll get disabled. Well, that has never happened, but that's a fear. It could be an okay fear. Um, so what they're asking us to do here is consider these fears, and this is where the third step comes into play. It says, perhaps there's a better way. We think so, for now we're on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust an infinite God rather than our finite self. We're in the world to play a role he assigns. Just to the extent that we do as we think he would have us and humbly rely on him, does enable us to match calamity with serenity. So if I'm dominated by fear, and I've made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand him, and fear and faith cannot cohabitate, then how do I learn to maneuver in this world without fear? Because that's the decision that I made in step 3. So I'm in the world to play a role he assigns. So what role am I assigned? I found it very easy. I found that it simplified my life when I thought about each role that I'm assigned. It's like when I'm at work, what role am I assigned at work? I'm an electrician. I'm not the boss. So I go to work and my attitude is the boss tells me to dig a ditch. I say how deep, how far. I don't play the boss. And my world gets simpler. I don't, if I'm not, I don't be something I'm not. When I'm in a relationship And my role is a provider, then that's the role I play. If my role is a boyfriend, then that's the role I play. Um, the role of a father. What does the role of a father look like? And I play that. What does a member of AA look like? And when I go to meetings, I change these hats quite often every day. And so when I go to meetings, the role I'm assigned is a book thumping member of AA. I stay sober and carry this message to other alcoholics. Whether they like it or not, that's the role that I'm assigned. When I go home, I'm not a book thumping member of AA. My job is provide security and safety for my home. Right when I go to work, my job is not to provide security and safety. My job is to do what I'm told to do, is to be an electrician. And once I was able to understand this, that I'm in the world to play a role he assigns, and I just do that role, then life became really simple. So just to the extent that I think I would do as I think he would have me and humbly rely on him, does he enable me to match calamity with serenity? So I'm in the world to play a role he assigns. So just to the extent, or just to my willingness, does he enable me to live comfortably? So this is the fear prayer. So I look at these fears that I have. If I'm in the world to play a role he assigns, and I have these fears, then I go to this fear prayer. And it says, we ask him to remove our fear. By the way, it's the bottom page 68. We ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be. And at once we commence to outgrow fear. So this is where step 2 really comes into practice. What is your conception of God? What would your God have you be in regard to your fear? Like the fear of being alone. So I asked God, or in my case, the conception of God going through this process with my grandmother. So I sit in like a meditative state, and I try to get the love of my grandmother inside my heart. And I asked my grandmother, or my conception of God, to go through this process to remove my fear of being alone and redirect my attention to what she would have me be. And I just sit and I wait for an answer. Now, what the Big Book describes this as is on page 133, and it's kind of ironic that it's in the family afterwards. It says, we're sure God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. We can't subscribe to the belief that life was a vale of tears, though it was just that for many of us. But it's clear we make our own misery. I made my own misery. God didn't do it. Avoid then the deliberate manufacture of misery. But if trouble comes, cheerfully capitalize on it as an opportunity to demonstrate his omnipotence. So we're sure God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free, so why am I not happy, joyous, and free? It's just to the extent that I do as I think he would have me and humbly rely on him, does he enable me to match calamity with serenity. It's this page 68, and this portion of the program is where the spiritual meets the material. This is where the two cross over, where the rubber hits the road. This is where I have to stop waiting for the miracle to happen, and I have to kind of step out in the world and make the miracle happen. If I'm afraid of facing people, then I got to go face people. I have to be an agent of God. He is the principal. I am his agent. I am empowered by this conception of God that I have to go do his will. And so I play this role of being empowered by. This is God's will. It's not mine, and then that takes some of the fear away because I know I'm walking in the path that's not mine. So, sexual inventory. The thing I'd like to kind of bring up on this one before we get started, because here we got a lot of crazy opinions out there. I mean, really absurd opinions, perhaps, like stay out of relationships in your first year, and I mean that's an absurd opinion in most circles. If you're not ready, then don't. If you're not ready to be in a relationship, then don't. But do not allow somebody to tell you that you can't be in one. If you want to be in one, get in one. God alone can judge this. So with this sexual inventory, a lot of people are afraid of this. This doesn't concern itself with who you have sex with or how you have sex. It only concerns itself with why do you have sex. So let's repeat that. This is not about who or how 10 toes up, 10 toes down, hanging from a basket, spinning around in the water, in the beach, in the desert, in front of everybody, or just in the privacy of your room. It doesn't concern itself with who or how. It just concerns itself with why. So now about sex. Many of us need an overhauling there, but above all, we try to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off track. Boy, is it. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? So we reviewed our own conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? We got this all done on paper and looked at it. And again, it says, where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? So these are all questions. And this is a narrative format. It's narrative. We tell a story. And not everybody that we've been with is going to be on this list. The one-night stands are not going to be on this list. Unless it was intended to arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness in another. The prostitutes are not going to be on this list, not unless it aroused jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness in others. If it's a mutual agreement, a one-night stand, it's not on this. This is about sexual relations. And again, not every relationship is going to be on this list. Most people know the two or three people who are going to be on here. The ones we hurt are the ones we abuse the most. And so this is an example. This is just an example of, just for the sake of this workshop. Brenda M. I dated her in high school. When we broke up, I knew her younger sister Sharon had a crush on me. I had never been with a virgin and wanted to have bragging rights. I think about 16, 17-year-old boy. I used her emotions to fill my ego. But think about that. A short time afterwards, I learned that another ex-girlfriend was available, so I dumped Sharon, thinking I could get back with this girlfriend. Self-seeking to the core. I abused this girl. Sharon was crushed, but I didn't care. So fast forward a couple years later, it was a party at Sharon's house, and Sharon and Brenda's house. I went there to reunite with Sharon. I brought the beer and pot because that's what I was known for, a party guy. We all got drunk. Sharon and Brenda passed out, and I took this opportunity to put the moves on their best friend. Isn't that crazy, scumbag? The friend didn't respond and informed Sharon the next morning. The look on Sharon's face the next morning told me the whole story. I just crushed her. I really didn't care about her feelings. Again, I was just using her. I always use sex to validate my manhood. I didn't care how each of these women really felt. It was a game of conquest and not love. I should have thought of Sharon's young innocence and allow her to grow emotionally before we had sex. The thing that I will go into is that I made my amends, and this is where it gets really, really touchy, is that, this is embarrassing, but in order for me to get well, I'd have to make these amends. And so we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relationship to this test, was it selfish or not? And we asked God to mold our ideals and help us live up to them. We remember that always our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed. So whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow towards it. And see, that's the process here when we start to grow. We must be willing to grow towards it. We must be willing to make amends where we've done harm, provided we do not bring still more harm in doing so. In other words, we treat sex as with any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do in each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it. The amends I owe Sharon, I should have thought of her young innocent emotion, allowed her to grow emotionally. I was dishonest when I started dating her and inconsiderate when I put the moves on her friend. God alone can judge our sex situation. Counsel with other persons is often desirable, but we let God be the final judge. We realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others about loose. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice. Now, it's kind of hard not to get hysterical thinking or advice. Everybody has their own opinion on this, and so it determines it basically is ultimately with you and God of what you think is right. And if we're in the world to play a role He assigns, and just to the extent we do as we think He would have us and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity. Thank you very much for listening to this 4-step workshop. You have a wonderful day.